How are you doing? Thank you once again for joining us for another math session with Mr. Woodford. I'm very excited to go over our Math 8 second lesson today, which we're talking about adding and subtracting fractions. I know how many of you wonderful students love fractions, and I think it's time for us to dive in and practice. All right, so I'm hoping that you have your packet with you or the assignment in front of you. If not, you can always go on your Google Classroom page and materials and access the content there. Right, so as you can see here, we're looking at lesson 1.2, adding and subtracting fractions. Now, before we dive in, we always start off with a bell work assignment. The bell work is to start us off. I want to give you some time. You can pause the video now and answer this question. In order to add or subtract fractions, they must share a what? What must they share? In order to add or subtract fractions, what must they share? So, all right. I hope you had time to think about this question. And the right answer here is common denominator. The right answer here is common denominator, right? I'm just going to fill that in. Or if you want, and what I'll probably do right now is I'll just draw an arrow, right? I'll draw an arrow just to show that that is where the word goes. Common denominator, this word, these two words, go right up there, okay? Sorry about the little pen glitch, but in order to add fractions, we need a common denominator, right? It's not even optional, because you do it without it. If you did, you would get a wrong answer, right? You would end up getting a wrong answer. It's not like multiplication where you just multiply straight across. Addition demands that, especially when it comes to fractions, you have the same somewhat base. You have that same denominator, and that's going to help you to correctly add. Otherwise, without it, you'll get the wrong fraction. All right. Another name, or another thing that we're going to be looking at is it's the least common multiple, right? Or the lowest common multiple of two sets of numbers. And that's what we're going to focus on in order to create ourselves a common denominator. So for example, let's see what you would do. See if you can figure out what the least common multiple is of 6 and 9 and 3 and 12. What do you think the least common multiple is of 6 and 9 and 3 and 12? So take a second, once again, pause the video if you need to, and see if you can figure out what the least common multiple is for these two numbers. All right, so if you said 3, you would be wrong. If you said 4, you'd be wrong, right? I'm saying this because I know that some of the thoughts in your mind is probably thinking more along the lines of factor and not multiple. What do you mean? You're probably thinking, well, 3 times 2 gives me 6, and 3 times 3 gives me 9. So they both have 3 in common. Not a bad thought. And you're thinking, well, 3 times 4 gives me 12, and that's probably what's in common between these two. Or, 3 times 1 and 3 times 4, and they both have 3 in common. It's not a bad thought process. However, we're not looking for factors. We're looking for multiples. So when I say least common multiple, I'm thinking of actually writing out the multiples of each one of these numbers, like this. 6, 12, 18, 24, 30, 36. Something like that. And it goes on, right? And I can do the same for 9. 9, 18, 27, 36, and that goes on. Now, notice that both of these numbers, and that's a comma there, right? Both of these numbers have 36 in common. But is that the least common that they have in common? No, because they also still have 18. So I would say that the least common multiple between these two numbers would be 18. So I'm just going to circle 18 here because that's the least common multiple of both of them. Okay, 18. Now, for letter B, right? Letter B, we got 3 and 12. We can list out once again the multiples, but I'm pretty sure by now you kind of got the idea. And you're probably saying right away, Mr. Woodford, 12 is the least common multiple. And if you said that, you would be absolutely correct because 12 is the number that they both have in common as multiples. Okay. Now, why is this important? This is one of the ways we're going to find the common denominator of fractions. We're going to use this technique, but I want to first show you another technique that I think is more popular amongst people as they go to just find common denominators quickly. It's not always the most simplified or reduced version of way, but it is a very common way to find the common denominator. So the first step when we're looking at fractions, we have 7/8 plus 6/5, right? 7/8 plus 6/5. Our first goal is to say, do we know what the common denominator is? Do we know what the common denominator is, right? We want to find a new common denominator so that we can rewrite these fractions. We see it's addition, but we want to say, okay, I want to put a number underneath here and rewrite these fractions. That number needs to be the same on both of them. A technique that's used is taking the denominators of the two fractions, in this case 8 and 5, and multiplying. This is one technique. And that's how you can find the common denominator. Multiply the denominators of those two fractions. That's a very easy way to find the common denominator. Now, is it always no simplified version? No, it's not. But in this case, it is the smallest version because 8 and 5, they only share 40. So it's not a bad way to go about doing it. But I want you to know that there is another way we're going to look at in a little bit, but this is the first way, the very quick way to find it. Now, after you found that common denominator, the second thing you need to say is, okay, did I create my new fractions? You have to create these new fractions. How do we create them? We need to say, okay, 8 times what got you 40? What do we do to 8 to get us 40? We multiplied 8 by 5. I know that. You know that. But whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. So since you multiply the bottom by 5, you have to multiply the top by 5. So we're going to do 7 times 5, and that's going to give us 35. Now, on the other side, you say, okay, 5 times what gave me 40? And we know that one as well, 5 times 8. 5 times 8 gave us 40. Whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. So I know 5 times 8 gave me 40, so now I have to do 6 times 8, which is 48. Now notice, when you go to add these together, you do not add the two denominators. You don't add them and do 40 plus 40 gives you 80. You don't do that. You leave the denominator as 40. It doesn't become 80. It doesn't multiply the times 2. It just stays what that common denominator was throughout the whole time. Okay, so now we have 40 on the bottom. If I did 35 plus 48, I would end up getting 83. So this answer is 83 over 40. Now, if you want to turn this into a mixed number, go for it. If you are, I'm okay with improper fractions. We're going to dive into more irrational numbers and more rational numbers later on, but I'm okay with looking at an improper fraction and seeing it. But if you feel more comfortable with reducing it, simplifying it, or turning it into a mixed number, please do so. That's fine with me. Let's look at B together. Now, B, our steps are still the same. First step, let's find that common denominator. Let's find it. The only thing is, if we did 16 times 8 like in the last problem, we would get 128. And that's a whole lot to be able to deal with. These are big numbers. Now, because I'm not, yes, I'm not enforcing reducing it. Could you do that? Sure. But I'd rather you get used to finding the least common multiple or the smallest one. So when we do practice reducing, you don't have to worry about such a big number to reduce. So instead, I want us to list out what the common denominators are, what's the common multiples, rather. Let's start with 16. 16, 32, right? And honestly, we could probably stop there because the other number is 8. So 8, 16, 24, 32. Okay. I see they both have 32, but I know it's not the smallest. Smallest is 16. So 16 will become my new denominator. Now pay attention, this is subtraction. The other one was addition. Whenever you add or subtract, you need common denominators. That's important. Multiplication? Nope. Division? Nope. Adding and subtracting. You need a common denominator. Now, what do we do to go from 16 to 16? What do we multiply by? We multiply by 1. And that gave us 8 over 16. What about 8? What do you do to 8 to multiply to give you 16? That's multiplied by 2. Whatever you do to the bottom, you do to the top. 8 times 2 gave you 16, so 5 times 2 gives you 10. Okay? Now, I have 8 16ths minus 10 16ths. In other words, it's really just saying, I know the bottom is going to be 16. What we have to figure out is what is 8 minus 10? 8 minus 10. Now, in our prior lessons that we did, right, I showed you how to create the visual representation of these things using circles. Or, if you wanted, you could use absolute value. Either one is perfectly fine. Okay, so right now you have 8 minus 10, which can be written as 8 plus a negative 10. Okay, 8 plus negative 10. If you want to do the visual representation of both of these, that's fine, right? Another technique is to say absolute value of both numbers and then subtract. 8, absolute value, negative 10, 10. 10 minus 8, take the bigger minus the smaller, gives you 2, and take the sign of the bigger absolute value, which in this case was that negative 10, so this would be negative 2. Okay? Or you could have drawn out your circles. That's my 8 open, right? And here go my 10 closed. Right? And what you'll notice is that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 will be crossed out, and we're left with 2. We're left with 2 of these. And that's why we get negative 2, because they're also shaded. So there's a couple ways to look at it, okay? Now, are there any questions? Any questions at all about how to do this? Okay? What I want you to do is practice this. Rewind the video if you need to. Take a second to really internalize it. There's a couple practice problems here that allows you to practice subtracting and adding fractions. Really go in and do it, as well as complete the homework page as well. Okay? I know this is all going to help you get better. Look forward to answering any and all of your questions if you have any. But until next time, I'll see you on another lesson. Have a great day. Bye-bye.